nothing but a worthless scrap of meat, and tonight you'll finally learn what happens to wolves who forget their place." The words hit Lyra like physical blows, each syllable designed to cut deeper than the last. She kept her head down, her hands steady as she scrubbed the stone floor of the pack house, but inside her chest something twisted with familiar pain. Beta Marcus stood over her, his massive frame blocking the afternoon light streaming through the windows, casting her deeper into shadow where she had always belonged. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, being treated as less than, but the words still carved fresh wounds every time. Around her, pack members gathered to watch her humiliation, their faces lit with cruel anticipation. This was entertainment for them. Her suffering always was. "The beast stables," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the great hall where the pack had assembled. "Let's see how long the little Omega lasts when she's face to face with creatures that actually have teeth." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. The beast stables. Even the bravest warriors spoke of them in hushed tones. A place where the pack kept creatures too dangerous for normal confinement. Warwolves gone feral, shadow beasts that had tasted blood. Things that prowled in the darkness at the edges of their territory and defied classification. It was where disobedient pack members were sent to face their fears. Most came out broken, some didn't come out at all. Lyra's crime had been simple. She had dared to speak up when Marcus had ordered her to clean the Alpha's quarters while he was in residence. She had tried to explain quietly that it wasn't proper for an unmated female to be alone in the Alpha's private rooms. For that moment of backbone, this was her reward. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible above the crowd's murmurs. "I'll do whatever task you set, just not the stables." Marcus's laugh was harsh and grating. "Oh, but I think the stables are exactly what you need. A night alone with the monsters should teach you some humility." He gestured to two of his enforcers. "Take her." Rough hands seized her arms, hauling her to her feet. Her knees trembled, but she forced herself to walk, rather than be dragged. She had learned long ago that maintaining what dignity she could was sometimes the only power she possessed. The crowd parted before them like she was diseased, their faces a mixture of pity and fascination. Some of the younger pack members looked genuinely frightened for her. Most just seemed eager to see what would happen. The walk across the compound felt eternal. Each step carried her closer to the ancient stone building that squatted at the far edge of the packlands like a malevolent toad. The beast stables had been built by the first Alpha King centuries ago, constructed from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Iron bars crossed narrow windows, and the massive wooden door was reinforced with metal bands that had been blessed by pack shamans to contain what lurked inside. As they approached, Lyra could hear them, low growls that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her feet, the scrape of claws against stone, sounds that made her wolf, weak and suppressed as it was, cower in the deepest part of her mind. The air around the building felt different, charged with predatory energy that made her skin crawl. Marcus produced a ring of keys, each one carved with protective runes. "The creatures inside haven't been fed in 3 days," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "They'll be hungry. Try not to provoke them too quickly. I want you to last until morning so you can properly appreciate the lesson." The door swung open with a groan of protesting hinges, releasing a wave of scent that nearly brought Lyra to her knees. Wild musk, dried blood, the metallic tang of rage and desperation. And underneath it all, something else. Something ancient and primal that called to a part of her she didn't understand. The interior was darker than midnight. Narrow shafts of dying sunlight slanted through the barred windows, illuminating glimpses of massive shapes moving in the shadows. Eyes reflected the light, dozens of pairs watching from the darkness. Yellow eyes, red eyes, eyes that glowed with their own inner fire. The sound of breathing filled the space, deep and hungry and patient. They shoved her inside and slammed the door behind her. The sound of the key turning in the lock was final as a death knell. Lyra pressed her back against the door, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. This was her survival strategy, honed by years of practice. Don't move, don't breathe loudly, don't do anything that might draw attention. She slid down the rough wooden surface until she was crouched on the stone floor, arms wrapped around her knees, making herself into the smallest target possible. The creatures moved in the darkness around her. She could hear the soft padding of enormous paws, the whisper of fur brushing against stone walls, the quiet snuffling of noses testing the air. They knew she was there. They could smell her fear, her weakness, her complete lack of defence. But something was wrong. In all the stories she had heard about the beast's stables, the attacks came immediately. Starved creatures falling upon their prey in a frenzy of claws and teeth. Yet minutes passed and nothing touched her. The sounds of movement continued, circling her position, but she remained untouched. Slowly, carefully, Lyra lifted her head. In the dim light, she could make out shapes that defied easy description. A wolf the size of a horse, its fur so black it seemed to absorb the remaining light. Something that might have once been human, but walked on 4 legs and possessed too many joints in its limbs. A creature with the body of a great cat, but eyes that held far too much intelligence. They were all watching her, not stalking, not preparing to attack, simply watching, as if they were waiting for something, as if they recognized something in her that she didn't recognize in herself. The largest of them, the black werewolf, took a step closer, then another. Lyra held her breath, certain this was the moment her short life would end. But instead of lunging, the massive creature lowered its head and inhaled deeply, scenting her. Its eyes, pale gold in the darkness, widened with what looked almost like surprise. Then it did something that made no sense at all. It whined softly, a sound of greeting and recognition. The other creatures stirred, moving closer now, but their movements weren't predatory. They approached like pack animals drawn to something familiar, something that called to them on a level deeper than hunger or aggression. One by one, they settled onto the stone floor around her, not quite close enough to touch, but near enough that she could feel their body heat in the cool air. Outside, night was falling. Soon it would be full dark, and she would be alone with monsters that should have killed her the moment she set foot in their domain. But as she sat there, surrounded by creatures that defied natural law, Lyra felt something she had never experienced before. She felt protected. The thought was insane, impossible, but she couldn't shake it. These beasts, these things that struck fear into the hearts of trained warriors, were treating her like pack, like she belonged here among them in a way she had never belonged among her own kind. As the last light faded from the windows and true darkness claimed the stable, Lyra closed her eyes and tried to understand what was happening to her. Deep inside her chest, something stirred, something that had been sleeping for so long she had forgotten it existed. Her wolf, weak and suppressed as it was, lifted its head and tested the air, and for the first time in her life it didn't cower. Instead, it felt home. 3 weeks after the mating ceremony, Lyra stood on the balcony of the Alpha King's private chambers, watching the morning training sessions unfold in the courtyard below. The changes were already visible. Pack members who had once treated each other with casual cruelty now worked together with something approaching respect, and the Omegas no longer flinched when Alphas passed by. "You're thinking too loudly," Kyle said, his arms sliding around her waist from behind. Through their completed mate bond, she could feel his contentment like warm honey in her veins, mixed with the fierce satisfaction he took in watching her grow into her role. "The Western Territories sent another delegation," she said, leaning back against his chest. "They want to see the Beast Speaker for themselves, to verify that the bloodline has truly returned." His lips brushed her temple, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Let them come. Let them all see what they missed when they dismissed you as broken. Below them, a group of young wolves was practicing their shifting under the guidance of Captain Thorne. Among them was the little girl who had asked if she was truly the beast speaker, Maya, whose confidence had blossomed under Lyra's gentle encouragement. As Lyra watched, the child completed a perfect transformation, her small wolf form gleaming with health and joy. "She reminds me of myself," Lyra said softly. "What I could have been if—" "You are exactly what you were meant to be," Kyle interrupted, his voice firm with conviction. "Every scar, every moment of pain, every year of suppression, it all led to this moment. You couldn't have become the leader you are if you hadn't understood suffering first." Through her connection with the compound's beasts, Lyra felt the approach of visitors before the guards announced them. A delegation from the northern peaks, led by an alpha she didn't recognize. But it wasn't their human leader that interested her. It was the creature padding alongside his horse. A dire wolf, massive and ancient, its silver-grey fur marked with scars that spoke of centuries of survival. As the delegation entered the courtyard, the dire wolf lifted its head and howled. Not in challenge, but in recognition. "Another one," Kyle murmured, wonder and pride mixing in his voice. "How many does that make now?" 17, Lyra said, watching as her own beast allies emerged from various corners of the compound to greet the newcomer. 17 ancient creatures that have travelled from across the continent to pledge themselves to the awakened bloodline. It still amazed her, the way legendary beasts appeared at their borders almost daily. War wolves from the eastern forests, great cats from the southern deserts, even a pair of ice bears from the far northern reaches, all drawn by the same ancient call that had first connected her to the creatures in the beast stables. "The pack elders are nervous," Kyle said with dark amusement. "They keep asking if the compound can support so many predators." "They support themselves," Lyra replied. "They hunt in the wildlands, keep to their own territories. They only come when called or when duty demands their presence. Like they had 3 days ago, when rogues had tested their borders, thinking to find weakness in the transition period. The attacking force had fled in terror when a shadow beast and 2 warwolves had appeared beside the regular border patrol, their message clear. This territory was under the protection of powers beyond normal pack law. "Lady Lyra?" A soft voice from the doorway made them both turn. Vera, the elderly healer who had unwittingly participated in Lyra's suppression, stood with her head bowed and a steaming cup in her hands. "I've brought your morning tea, the blend you requested for energy and clarity." Lyra accepted the cup with a smile that still made the older woman's eyes widen with relief. It had taken weeks for the pack members to believe that their new queen truly held no grudges, that mercy had been given freely rather than as a trap. "Thank you, Vera. How is your apprentice doing with the new healing protocols?" "Very well, my lady. Young Marcus." The healer stopped, her face going pale as she realized she had named the apprentice after their former beta. "It's all right," Lyra said gently. "Names don't carry the sins of those who bore them before. Your apprentice is a good boy with healing hands. That's all that matters." After Vera left, Kyle pulled Lyra closer, his chin resting on top of her head. "You constantly amaze me," he said. "The way you've transformed this place, these people. They're not just following you out of fear or political necessity. They genuinely respect you." "Because I see them," Lyra said simply. "All my life I was invisible. I know what that feels like, to be dismissed or ignored or treated as disposable. I won't do that to others." A commotion in the courtyard drew their attention. The delegation from the northern peaks had been joined by unexpected guests. Elder Marion leading a group of children toward the visiting dire wolf. The ancient beast lowered its massive head, allowing the smallest ones to touch its fur while their parents watched in amazement. 6 months ago, those children would have been taught to fear such creatures, Kyle observed. Now they see them as protectors. "As they should," Lyra said. "The old ways taught separation, division between human and beast, between pack and wild. The Beast Speaker bloodline was always meant to bridge those gaps. Her abilities had grown stronger with each passing day, not just the connection to predators, but an understanding of the natural world that went deeper than mere communication. She could sense illness in livestock before symptoms appeared, guide lost travellers through mental connection with local wildlife, even influence weather patterns through her bond with the great eagles that ruled the high peaks. "The Council of Alphas has requested a formal audience," Kyle said, his tone carefully neutral. "They want to discuss how your unique gifts might be utilised for the benefit of all territories." Lyra's lips curved in a smile that held more than a little steel. "They want to use me, you mean? Turn the Beast Speaker into a weapon for their political games?" "Some of them, yes. Others are genuinely curious about how to incorporate your methods into their own leadership. Change is coming whether they like it or not. The question is whether they'll adapt or be swept aside." Through her connection with her beast allies, Lyra felt a familiar presence approaching. Fenris, Kyle's personal war beast, returning from patrol with news. The massive creature padded onto the balcony through the open doors, its burning eyes fixed on her with the devotion that had never wavered since that first moment of recognition. "What does he have to report?" she asked, extending her hand to touch the beast's midnight fur. Images flashed through her mind, border territories requesting audience, trade delegations asking for safe passage under her protection, even rumours of other suppressed bloodlines beginning to stir. The awakening of the Beast Speaker had created ripples that spread far beyond their territory. "The world is changing," she murmured, processing the information Fenris had shared. "Faster than anyone expected." "Because of you," Kyle said, his voice warm with pride and possessive satisfaction. "My queen, my impossible, magnificent mate who refuses to let anyone remain invisible." Below them, the morning training session concluded with young Maya shifting back to human form and running to share her success with the visiting dire wolf. The ancient creature's tail wagged like a puppy's, and even the stern Northern Peaks delegation couldn't hide their smiles at the sight. "This is what I want," Lyra said, watching the scene with deep contentment. Not grand political alliances or territorial expansions, just connection, understanding, a world where children aren't afraid of their own nature. Kale turned her in his arms, his dark eyes blazing with the golden light that marked their bond. "Then that's what we'll build," he said simply, "one pack at a time, one territory at a time, until your vision becomes reality." As he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, Lyra felt the last of her old fears dissolve. She was no longer the broken Omega who scrubbed floors and believed herself worthless. She was the Beast Speaker, mate to the Alpha King, bridge between worlds that had been separated for too long. And this was only the beginning. 6 months had passed since the mating ceremony when Lyra found herself walking the familiar path to the beast stables, her steps slow and contemplative in the afternoon sunlight. The building looked different now, no longer a place of punishment and terror, but a sanctuary where her most loyal allies made their home. The heavy wooden door stood open, welcoming rather than forbidding, and sunlight streamed through windows that had been enlarged to let in more light. Inside, the ancient stone had been cleaned and carved with protective runes, transforming the space into something that felt sacred rather than sinister. "I wondered when you would come here," said a familiar voice from the shadows. The ancient white wolf padded forward, its silver eyes gleaming with the wisdom of centuries. It had remained in the stables by choice, serving as guardian and advisor to the creatures that continued to arrive, seeking the Beast Speaker's protection. "I needed to see it again," Lyra said, running her hand along the stone wall where she had once cowered in terror. "To understand how far I've travelled from that frightened girl who thought she was going to die in this place." "And what do you see now?" the wolf asked, settling beside her with the fluid grace that marked all truly ancient creatures. "Home," she said simply. "This is where I first felt their recognition, where I began to understand what I truly was. everything changed in these walls. The werewolf emerged from the deeper shadows, followed by the shadow beast and several of the newer arrivals, creatures drawn from across the continent by the awakening of the bloodline. They arranged themselves around her in the same protective circle they had formed that first impossible night, but now it felt like celebration rather than defence. "You've built something beautiful," Lyra continued, gesturing toward the comfortable nests and carefully maintained spaces where each creature had made its home. A place where the wild and civilized can coexist. "As you have done with the entire territory," the ancient wolf replied. "The changes ripple outward. Other packs are beginning to question their treatment of the vulnerable, to seek harmony rather than dominance." Through the open door she could hear the sounds of the compound going about its daily business. No longer the harsh orders and casual cruelty of the old regime, but the productive hum of people working together toward common goals. Children's laughter echoed from the training grounds where young Maya was teaching newer arrivals how to shift with confidence rather than fear. "Kyle thinks I spend too much time looking backward," Lyra said, settling cross-legged on the stone floor as she had that first night. "He wants me to focus on the future we're building." "And what do you think?" the wolf asked, amusement colouring its mental voice. "I think the past and future aren't separate things," she replied. "The girl who was broken in this place is part of who I am now. Her pain taught me compassion. Her isolation taught me to see the invisible. Her worthlessness taught me that value doesn't depend on power." The shadow beast approached and pressed its massive head against her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that would have been unthinkable when she was merely the pack's omega. Now it was simply one queen acknowledging another, for that was what she had become in their eyes. "Sometimes I dream about them," she said quietly. "My parents. I see flashes of who they might have been, a mother who sang to beasts in the deep forest, a father whose presence could calm even the most savage predators. I wonder if they would be proud of what I've accomplished." "They died protecting the future you represent," the ancient wolf said gently. "Everything you have built, every life you have touched, every change you have brought about, it exists because they chose to sacrifice themselves rather than let the bloodline be extinguished." Footsteps at the entrance made her turn. Kyle appeared in the doorway, his presence still commanding but tempered now by the deep contentment that flowed through their bond. He had learned to find her here during her moments of reflection, understanding her need to process the magnitude of what had changed. "The delegation from the Eastern Reaches has arrived," he said, settling beside her with the easy familiarity of a mate who had learned to share her sacred spaces. "They're requesting formal alliance terms, but they want to meet with you specifically." "Because I'm the beast speaker," she said, not really a question. "Because you're you," he corrected, his hand finding hers with the unconscious ease of deep partnership. "They've heard about the changes here, the way you've transformed not just the power structure, but the entire culture. They want to learn from you." Around them, the beasts stirred with contentment, responding to the harmony between their chosen leaders. The war-wolf stretched out beside Kyle's feet, while the shadow beast claimed its favourite spot near the ancient stones that held the deepest magic. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked suddenly, "claiming a mate who comes with so many complications? Ancient beasts, political upheaval, territories wanting to study me like some fascinating specimen?" Kyle's laugh was rich and warm, echoing off the stone walls. "Regret finding the other half of my soul? Regret watching you transform from hidden royalty to acknowledged queen? Regret building a world where strength means protection rather than domination?" He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes blazing with golden light. "Never." Through their bond, she felt the absolute truth of his words, the fierce joy he took in her accomplishments, the pride that burned in him every time another territory requested her guidance or another ancient creature arrived to pledge itself to her protection. "The Council of Alphas has officially recognized the Beast Speaker bloodline," he continued. "They're proposing a new accord, one that acknowledges your authority over matters involving the wild creatures, gives you a voice in territorial disputes, essentially makes you a power unto yourself." "And what did you tell them?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "That any accord would need to be negotiated with both of us," he said with satisfaction. "You're not just my queen, Lyra, you're a force of nature in your own right, and they're finally beginning to understand that." The ancient white wolf lifted its head, silver eyes focusing on something beyond the stable walls. "More visitors approach," it announced, "a pack from the southern mountains, travelling with creatures I have not seen in many decades." Lyra rose, brushing dust from her simple dress, and moved to the doorway. In the distance she could see the approaching delegation, and the magnificent beasts travelling with them, great cats with coats that shimmered like liquid gold, their size and bearing marking them as creatures of legend. "Mountain lions," she breathed, wonder filling her voice. The golden pride that was thought extinct. "Not extinct," Kyle said, stepping up beside her. "Just waiting for the right time to emerge from hiding, like so many other things that are surfacing now that the beast speaker has awakened." As the delegation drew closer, the golden cats lifted their voices in a chorus of recognition, not the territorial challenge of competing predators, but the greeting song of creatures acknowledging their rightful queen. Around the compound, her own beast allies responded with calls of welcome, creating a symphony of wild voices that spoke of unity rather than dominance. "Come," Kyle said, offering her his arm with the formal courtesy that never failed to make her heart flutter. "Let's go welcome our guests and see what changes they bring to our growing kingdom." As they walked together toward the main compound, Lyra felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders, not heavy, but warm, like a cloak of starlight. The broken Omega, who had once scrubbed floors in silence, was gone forever, replaced by a queen who spoke for the wild and protected the vulnerable. Behind them, the beast stables stood open to the afternoon sun, no longer a place of punishment, but a symbol of transformation. Where she had once expected to die, she had instead learned to live. Where she had been meant to break, she had found the strength to become unbreakable. The circle was complete, but the story was far from over. 1 year had passed since the beast speaker awakened, and the world had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Lyra stood on the highest balcony of the palace that had been built where the old pack house once stood, her hand resting protectively over the gentle curve of her belly. Below her, the territory that had once been marked by casual cruelty and rigid hierarchy now thrived with a harmony that drew visitors from across the continent. Children played in gardens where exotic flowers bloomed under the care of creatures that had once been considered monsters. Young Maya, now 13, and showing the first signs of her own gift for beast communication, rode through the courtyard on the back of a dire wolf twice her size, both of them laughing with pure joy. "She reminds me of you," Kyle said, joining her at the railing with the quiet grace that still made her heart skip. His hand covered hers, and through their bond she felt his wonder at the life they had created together. A child who would carry both the Alpha King's strength and the Beast Speaker's ancient magic. "She reminds me of who I could have been," Lyra corrected gently, "if I had been allowed to grow up knowing my worth." In the year since her awakening, delegations had arrived from territories across the known world. Some came seeking alliance, others requesting mediation for conflicts that had raged for generations. All left changed by what they witnessed, a society where strength was measured not by dominance, but by protection, where the vulnerable were sheltered rather than exploited. "The Northern Federation has agreed to the new accords," Kale reported, his voice warm with satisfaction. "They're implementing protection protocols for their Omegas, and they've established sanctuaries for creatures that were once hunted to near extinction." "And the Eastern Reaches?" she asked, though she could already feel the answer through their bond. "Fully integrated into the new system. Their alpha personally apologized for the years of silence when your parents' deaths went uninvestigated. His hand tightened on hers. Justice delayed, perhaps, but not denied. Through her connection with the vast network of creatures that now served as her eyes and ears across multiple territories, Lyra could sense the changes rippling outward like stones thrown into still water. Young wolves who had been destined for lives of servitude were discovering hidden gifts. Ancient creatures thought extinct were emerging from their hiding places. Most importantly, the rigid caste system that had defined pack life for centuries was beginning to crumble. A commotion in the courtyard drew their attention. A delegation had arrived, not the formal political visitors they received weekly, but something far more significant. Elder Marion led a group of elderly wolves toward the palace steps, their faces bearing expressions of wonder and barely contained excitement. "What is it?" Lyra asked, but even as she spoke, understanding dawned. Through her network of allies, she could feel them, other suppressed bloodlines, their power stirring for the first time in generations. "The awakening cascade," Kyle said, awe-colouring his voice. "Your emergence has triggered something larger. The old suppressions are failing across the continent." They descended to meet the delegation, and Lyra's breath caught as she recognised what she was seeing. A young male whose aura shimmered with the power of foresight, his gift no longer buried beneath layers of deliberate suppression. An elderly female whose hands glowed with healing light that went beyond normal pack magic. Even a teenage girl whose presence made the very air sing with harmony. Another beast speaker, the bloodline stronger than anyone had dared hope. "My queen," Elder Marion said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "They're awakening everywhere, bloodlines that were thought extinct, gifts that were buried so deep their families had forgotten they ever existed. The world is returning to what it was always meant to be." Lyra felt Kyle's arm slide around her waist as the magnitude of what was happening settled over them both. This wasn't just about her awakening, her reclaimed power, her personal transformation from victim to queen. This was about the restoration of magic itself, the return of wonder to a world that had tried to reduce everything to simple hierarchies of strength. "How many?" she asked. "Dozens confirmed, hundreds more showing signs. The suppression network the Shadow Council maintained was vaster than we imagined, but it was all connected. When you broke free, you created cracks that are spreading through every link in their chain." A soft kick from within her belly made Lyra smile, her free hand moving to the spot where their child rested. Through the mate bond, she felt Kyle's fierce protectiveness surge, mixed with wonder at what their offspring might become. A child born to parents who had never known suppression, who would grow up in a world where gifts were celebrated rather than buried. "The Council of Newly Awakened Bloodlines has requested a formal gathering," Elder Marion continued. "They want to establish new protocols, new ways of identifying and protecting gifted children before they can be suppressed." "Of course," Lyra said without hesitation. "We'll host it here, where they can see what's possible when gifts are allowed to flourish." As the delegation dispersed to prepare for the historic gathering, Kyle guided her to the garden where they had held their mating ceremony. Ancient trees provided shelter for creatures that ranged from tiny songbirds to massive predators, all coexisting in harmony that would have been impossible under the old ways. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his dark eyes searching her face. "You'll be seen as the catalyst, the leader of this new age. The responsibility—" "Is exactly what I was born for," she finished, certainty ringing in her voice. "Every moment of pain, every year of suppression, every scar on my soul, it all prepared me to understand what these newly awakened will face. I can guide them because I've walked their path." The ancient white wolf padded toward them across the grass, its silver eyes bright with approval. Behind it came the war wolf, the shadow beast, and a dozen other creatures that had become not just allies, but family. They arranged themselves in their familiar protective circle, but now it felt like celebration rather than defense. "The bloodlines return," the ancient wolf said, its mental voice warm with satisfaction. "The suppression era ends. Balance is restored." "Not restored," Lyra corrected gently. "Reborn. We're not going back to the old ways. We're creating something entirely new." As evening fell and the first stars appeared, delegates began arriving for the historic gathering. Lyra watched from the garden as carriages and riding parties converged on their territory, each bringing representatives of bloodlines that had been hidden for generations. She could feel their gifts like distant music, harmonizing in ways that made the very air shimmer with potential. "What are you thinking about?" Kyle asked, settling beside her on the bench they had placed beneath their favourite tree. "Names," she said, her hand stroking her belly where their child grew strong. "What do you call the first generation born into freedom, the children who will never know suppression, who will grow up believing their gifts are normal and beautiful?" "The founders," he said without hesitation. "They'll be the ones who establish the new traditions, who teach their own children that worth comes from within, not from the approval of others." Through her bond with every creature within 100 miles, Lyra felt the pulse of the new world they were creating. Ancient magic stirring to life, young voices raised in confidence rather than fear, the sound of barriers crumbling throughout the known territories. "I love you," she said suddenly, turning to face the male who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "Not just as my mate, but as my partner in this. We've built something beautiful together." "We've built something necessary," he corrected, his lips brushing hers with infinite tenderness. "A world where children like ours will never have to choose between hiding their gifts or facing persecution." As he kissed her beneath the starlight, surrounded by creatures that had once been considered monsters and delegates representing the return of magic itself, Lyra felt the last piece of her transformation click into place. She was no longer the girl who had been locked in the beast stables as punishment. She was the woman who had claimed those same stables as the foundation of a new world. The beast speaker had awakened, the bloodlines had returned, and tomorrow they would begin building a future where every child could grow up knowing their true worth. The circle was complete, but the story would never end. Dawn broke over the compound with cruel efficiency, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Lyra stirred from the fitful sleep she had managed against the stable wall, her body aching from the cold stone floor. Around her, the creatures that should have torn her apart in the darkness were beginning to wake as well, stretching massive limbs and yawning to reveal teeth that could shred a man in seconds. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she had survived a night in the beast stables. The sound of approaching footsteps made her scramble to her feet, pressing herself back against the door. Voices carried through the morning air, Beta Marcus and several pack members coming to see what remained of her. She could hear the anticipation in their tones, the eager curiosity about whether they would find a corpse or simply bloodstains on the stone. "Probably nothing left but bones by now," someone was saying with dark satisfaction. "Those shadow beasts haven't had fresh meat in days." "The war-wolf alone could have taken her head off with one bite," another voice added. "Should make for quite a sight." The key turned in the lock, and Lyra closed her eyes, bracing herself for their shock, their questions, their disbelief. The door swung open, flooding the stable with morning light, and she heard the collective intake of breath that told her they had found something they never expected to see. Her, standing upright, breathing, whole. "Impossible," Marcus breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "How are you? What did you—" But his words died as his gaze moved beyond her to the creatures arranged throughout the stable. The black war-wolf lay stretched out near the far wall, completely relaxed, watching the newcomers with calm intelligence. The shadow beast that had haunted pack nightmares for months was grooming itself like an oversized cat, paying no attention to the armed warriors in the doorway. Even the creature with too many joints had settled into a peaceful rest, its breathing slow and steady. "They should have killed you the moment you stepped inside," Marcus said, his voice tight with confusion and something that might have been fear. "These beasts are monsters. They've torn apart warriors, alphas, creatures twice your size." Lyra said nothing, because what could she say? That she didn't understand it either. That something had happened in the darkness that made no sense to her own mind. Instead, she kept her head down and waited for whatever punishment would come next. That was when the war wolf moved. The massive creature rose to its feet with fluid grace, each movement displaying the lethal power contained in its frame. Marcus and his men tensed, hands moving to weapons, expecting an attack. But instead of lunging at them, the war wolf padded over to where Lyra stood and lowered its great head, pressing its muzzle gently against her shoulder. The gesture was unmistakable, protective, claiming. The kind of contact that spoke of pack bonds and loyalty that ran deeper than simple training. "What in the name of the moon goddess?" one of the warriors whispered. The reaction spread through the other creatures like wildfire. The shadow beast lifted its head and fixed its burning red eyes on Marcus, a low rumble building in its chest, not quite a growl, but definitely a warning. The multi-jointed creature unfolded itself and moved closer to Lyra's other side, creating a barrier between her and the men in the doorway. Marcus stepped back, his face pale with shock. These were the same beasts that had required an entire squad of his best warriors to capture and contain. Creatures so dangerous that even approaching their cages was considered a death wish. And they were protecting an Omega who couldn't even shift properly. "There has to be an explanation," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Some trick, some—" The warwolf's lips pulled back from its teeth, and the sound that emerged was pure menace, not directed at Lyra, but at anyone who might threaten her. The message was crystal clear: touch her and face the consequences. Around the stable, other pack members had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Word was spreading quickly through the compound. The Omega had survived, and somehow the beasts were acting like she was one of them. Whispers rippled through the crowd, voices growing louder as more people arrived to witness the impossible scene. "My grandmother told stories," an elderly female was saying to anyone who would listen. "Stories about the old bloodlines, the ones who could speak to any creature, wild or tame." "Nonsense," Marcus snapped, but his authority was shaking. "There's no such thing. These are just animals responding to... He couldn't finish the sentence because there was no logical explanation. Lyra could see it in his eyes, the way his certainty was crumbling in the face of something that defied everything he thought he knew about the natural order. The shadow beast rose and moved to stand directly in front of her, its body a living wall of protection. Its red eyes never left Marcus, and the rumble in its chest grew louder. Around the stable the other creatures were stirring, responding to some signal she couldn't perceive but felt in her bones. "Get back!" Marcus ordered his men, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "All of you, step back!" But they were already moving away from the door, their warriors' instincts screaming warnings about the shift in predator dynamics. These creatures, which had been contained through fear and superior numbers, were no longer acting like prisoners. They were acting like a pack, and she was at the centre of it. Lyra felt something stirring deep inside her chest, that same sensation from the night before, but stronger now. Her wolf, so long suppressed and silent, was trying to push closer to the surface. Not to shift. She had never been able to manage that, but to respond to the recognition she felt from the creatures around her. They knew her. Somehow, impossibly, they knew what she was, even when she didn't know it herself. The warwolf turned back to her and made a sound she had never heard before, a soft chuff of greeting, the kind of vocalization used between pack members of equal standing. Its pale gold eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Intelligence, yes, but more than that. Understanding. As if it could see past the facade of weakness and worthlessness to something underneath that had been hidden even from herself. "This changes nothing," Marcus declared, but his voice was too loud, too forced. "She stays here until I decide otherwise. These animals are just confused. Hungry creatures will bond with anyone who feeds them." But even as he spoke, Lyra could see the doubt in his eyes, and she could hear the whispers growing louder behind him, pack members talking about old legends, ancient bloodlines, powers that had been lost to time but never truly forgotten. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the stable windows, and with each passing hour the impossible became harder to deny. The creatures that should have killed her were guarding her. The beasts that struck terror into the hearts of warriors were treating her like something precious, and deep inside her chest, something that had been sleeping for her entire life was finally beginning to wake up. By midday, the crowd outside the beast stables had grown into something resembling a festival, though the atmosphere thrummed with tension rather than celebration. Pack members pressed against the iron bars of the windows, trying to catch glimpses of the impossible scene within. Word had spread beyond their territory. Runners had been dispatched to neighbouring packs, and even rogues were beginning to gather at the borders, drawn by rumours that defied belief. Lyra sat in the centre of the stable, surrounded by creatures that should have been her executioners. The werewolf had taken position directly beside her, its massive bulk a warm presence against her side. Every few minutes it would lift its head to scan the crowd beyond the bars, a low rumble of warning vibrating through its chest whenever someone pressed too close. "I've never seen anything like it," an elderly pack member was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "Not in all my years. These beasts, they're acting like she's their alpha." "That's impossible," someone else protested. "She can't even shift properly. How could she command creatures like that?" But the evidence was undeniable. The shadow beast that had terrorized the pack for months lay stretched out near Lyra's feet like an oversized house cat, occasionally lifting its head to fix burning red eyes on anyone who looked threatening. The multi-jointed creature had positioned itself near the door, effectively blocking any attempt at entry. Even the smaller predators had arranged themselves in a protective circle, creating a living barrier between her and the outside world. Elder Marion pushed through the crowd, her ancient eyes sharp with recognition and something that might have been fear. At 93, she was the oldest member of their pack, keeper of stories and traditions that most had dismissed as folklore. Her gaze swept over the scene, taking in details that others might miss. "I need to see Beta Marcus immediately," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of speculation. "There are things that need to be discussed, old things, dangerous things." Lyra watched through the bars as the elder woman disappeared back into the compound, moving with surprising speed for someone of her years. Something cold settled in her stomach. She had learned to read the signs over her lifetime of abuse. When the powerful decided her fate, it never ended well for her. The werewolf seemed to sense her distress. It shifted closer, pressing its flank against her more firmly, and made a soft sound of comfort. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle from such a fearsome creature that tears pricked at her eyes. When had anyone ever offered her comfort before? "Look at that," a voice said from the crowd. "It's like they understand her." They did understand her. That was the part that terrified and amazed her in equal measure. She could feel their emotions like a low hum beneath her skin. Protectiveness, loyalty, and something deeper. Recognition. They saw something in her that she couldn't see in herself. Something that called to their wild hearts. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant lower when new voices joined the crowd. Harsher voices, filled with anger and barely controlled panic. Lyra recognized the tone even before she saw the speaker. Celeste, the pack's most eligible female and Marcus's intended mate, pushing through the gathered wolves with murder in her pale blue eyes. "This is ridiculous," Celeste declared, her perfectly styled hair catching the light as she gestured dismissively at the stable. "You're all standing here gawking at parlour tricks while that pathetic Omega makes fools of us all." The werewolf's head snapped up, ears forward and lips pulling back from its teeth. The sound that emerged was pure menace, a warning that made several pack members step back. But Celeste either didn't understand the danger or was too angry to care. "She's probably been feeding them," she continued, her voice rising, "sneaking them treats, bribing them to act tame. There's no other explanation for this charade." A soft chuckle came from behind her, and Elder Marion returned with Marcus at her side, both of their faces grave. "Child," the old woman said, her voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom, "if you think those creatures can be bribed with treats, you understand nothing about what we're witnessing." Marcus looked haggard, as if he had aged years in the few hours since dawn. His usual confidence was nowhere to be seen, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like fear. "Tell them," he said to Marion, his voice rough, "tell them what you told me." The elder woman nodded, her ancient eyes finding Lyra through the bars. "There are bloodlines older than our pack, older than most packs, lines that trace back to the first wolves, when the barrier between human and beast was thinner, more fluid." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. "The beast speakers, wolves who could command any creature, wild or tame, with nothing more than their will." "Fairy tales," Celeste scoffed, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "The bloodline was thought extinct," Marion continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "hunted down and eliminated centuries ago by those who feared their power. But bloodlines have a way of surviving, of hiding in the most unlikely places until the time comes for them to resurface." Lyra felt the world tilt around her. The words made no sense, yet they resonated in her bones like a bell being struck. Inside her chest, her wolf stirred more strongly than it ever had before, lifting its head as if scenting something on the wind. "You're suggesting she's one of them?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "This Omega who can't even shift?" "I'm suggesting," Marion said quietly, "that perhaps she can't shift because her power was never meant to be contained in such a simple form. The beast speakers didn't just become wolves, they became something else entirely, something more." The shadow beast at Lyra's feet lifted its head and made a sound she had never heard before, a keen of recognition that raised the hair on her arms. Around the stable, the other creatures stirred, responding to something in the elder's words that called to them on a primal level. "This is insane," Celeste snarled, but there was panic creeping into her voice now. "She's nothing. She's nobody. I've known her since we were children, and she's never shown any special abilities." "Because her power was suppressed," Marion said, her eyes boring into Marcus with an intensity that made him flinch. "The question is by whom and why?" Silence fell over the crowd like a weight. Lyra could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the attention of dozens of pack members focused on her like a physical force. The creatures around her had gone still, as if they were waiting for something, as if they knew what was coming even when she didn't. "There's one way to know for certain," Marion said finally. "Send word to the Alpha King. He'll want to see this for himself. The beast speakers were always connected to the royal bloodlines. If she truly carries that power, he'll recognize it." Marcus paled at the suggestion. "You want me to bring the Alpha King here, based on the word of an Omega and some tame animals?" The werewolf rose to its feet in one fluid motion, its pale gold eyes fixed on Marcus with unmistakable threat. The sound that rumbled from its chest was deeper than thunder, promising violence if the wrong words were spoken. Around the stable, every other creature stirred, responding to their leader's warning. "I don't think," Marion said with dry amusement, "that you have much choice in the matter. Look at them, Marcus. Really look. When was the last time you saw predators like these show such unified loyalty? They're not just protecting her, they're claiming her as pack, as Alpha." The word hit Lyra like a physical blow. Alpha, her, the weakest member of their pack, the Omega who couldn't shift, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but scrub floors and endure abuse. The idea was so ridiculous it should have been laughable. But the creatures around her didn't think it was laughable. They pressed closer, forming a tighter circle of protection, their eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of threat. And deep inside her chest, something ancient and powerful stirred in response to their recognition. As the sun began to set on her second day in the beast stables, Lyra closed her eyes and tried to understand what was happening to her. But one thing had become crystal clear. Whatever she was, whatever power flowed through her veins, the world was about to change, and there would be no going back. The second night in the beast stables brought dreams that weren't dreams. Lyra found herself running through ancient forests on 4 legs, her paws silent against moss-covered earth that had never known the footstep of modern wolves. Around her, creatures of legend kept pace, wolves the size of bears, their fur silver as moonlight, their eyes holding wisdom accumulated over centuries. She wasn't just running with them, she was leading them, her voice calling them forward through bonds deeper than blood. But these weren't her memories. They belonged to someone else, someone whose blood sang with the same rhythm that pulsed through her veins now. A female warrior from generations past, standing atop a cliff as thousands of creatures answered her call. Bears and wolves, great cats and hunting birds, even the serpents of the deep forest, all bowing their heads in recognition of her authority. The dream memory shifted, showing her the ancient bloodline that had once ruled, not through force, but through harmony with all living things. The beast speakers, who could walk between worlds, who served as bridges between the civilized and the wild. Until fear had turned to hatred, and hatred had turned to hunting, and the bloodline had been systematically erased from the world. Lyra woke with tears on her cheeks and the taste of ancient pain in her mouth. Around her, the creatures of the stable were stirring, their eyes reflecting the faint moonlight streaming through the barred windows. But something had changed during the night. The barriers in her mind, weakened by whatever suppression had held them in place for her entire life, had cracked further. She could feel their emotions now, not as a distant hum, but as clear as spoken words. The werewolf beside her was dreaming of running free across endless territories, but underneath that dream was a deeper current of loyalty and protectiveness directed entirely at her. The shadow beast near the door was remembering the taste of freedom before captivity, but those memories were fading, replaced by contentment at having found its true pack leader. Even the smaller predators scattered throughout the stable pulsed with the same recognition. She belonged here, with them, in ways she had never belonged among her own kind. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. She rose slowly, careful not to disturb the werewolf, and moved deeper into the stable. Past the main area where the more familiar creatures rested, beyond the heavy iron gate that separated the truly dangerous from the merely feral. She had never ventured this far before, but something was calling to her from the shadows, something that made her newly awakened instincts hum with anticipation. The darkness here was absolute, broken only by pairs of eyes that watched her approach with ancient patience. These were the creatures that even the beast keepers feared to approach, the ones that had been captured, but never truly tamed. Yet as she walked among them, her bare feet silent on the stone floor, they stirred not with aggression, but with something that felt remarkably like reverence. In the deepest corner of the stable, behind bars that had been reinforced 3 times over, something vast moved in the shadows. Lyra approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs until she could make out the form resting against the far wall. It had once been a wolf, she thought, but time and whatever dark magic had touched it had transformed it into something else entirely. Easily twice the size of the werewolf, its fur was white as fresh snow, but seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Ancient scars crossed its muzzle and flanks, speaking of battles fought in ages past, and its eyes were silver, like liquid moonlight, and when they fixed on her she felt recognition slam through her with the force of a physical blow. "You!" the creature said, and its voice resonated not through sound, but directly into her mind. "Finally, you have come." Lyra's knees nearly buckled. She pressed her hand against the iron bars, feeling the cold metal warm under her touch. "You can speak. As can you, little speaker, though you have forgotten how." The ancient wolf rose, moving with fluid grace despite its massive size. "I have been waiting for you to find your way to me, waiting to see if the bloodline had truly awakened, or if you were simply another pretender drawn by forces you could not understand." "I don't understand any of this," Lyra whispered. "The dreams, the way they respond to me, what's happening to me?" "You carry the blood of the first speakers," the creature said, padding closer to the bars, the line that was thought extinct, hunted down by those who feared what they could not control. But bloodlines have a way of surviving, of hiding until the time comes for them to resurface. The wolf's silver eyes seemed to look right through her, seeing things she couldn't see herself. "Your parents knew what you were. They died trying to protect you, trying to hide you from those who would see your power buried forever." The words hit her like physical blows. Her parents, the ones she had been told died in a hunting accident when she was an infant. They were murdered by those who serve the old ways, who believe that power should flow through strength alone rather than harmony with the natural world. They could not kill you. You were too young, too well hidden, but they could suppress your gifts, weaken your wolf, make you believe you were nothing more than a broken omega. Lyra felt something crack inside her chest, like ice breaking under spring sun. All her life, the weakness, the inability to shift, the sense that she was fundamentally flawed. It had all been deliberate. Someone had stolen her birthright and left her with nothing but pain and shame. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That, little speaker, you will have to discover for yourself. But know this, your awakening cannot be hidden much longer. Even now, word spreads beyond these walls. Soon, those who have kept you suppressed will realize their mistake, and they will come for you with everything they have." The ancient wolf pressed its muzzle against the bars, and Lyra felt compelled to reach out and touch the white fur. The moment their skin made contact, power shot through her like lightning. Not painful, but overwhelming, as if every suppressed instinct and buried ability was suddenly trying to surface at once. Images flashed through her mind, herself standing in command of not just the creatures in this stable, but wild packs that stretched across continents, her voice calling to every predator within 1,000 miles, her power flowing out like a tide that could not be contained or controlled. She saw herself as she truly was, not the broken omega the world had convinced her she must be, but something magnificent and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. When the contact broke, she staggered backward, gasping. The ancient wolf watched her with satisfaction gleaming in its silver eyes. "Now you begin to understand," it said. "The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you continue to hide, to let them suppress what you are? Or will you claim your birthright and take your place as the last of the beast speakers?" Before Lyra could answer, sounds from the main stable area made them both turn. Heavy footsteps, urgent voices, the clang of metal on stone. Someone was coming, and from the tension she could suddenly feel radiating from every creature in the building. Whoever it was commanded power that even the beasts recognized. "He comes," the ancient wolf said with something that might have been amusement. "The Alpha King himself, drawn by rumors of an awakening he never expected to witness. Are you ready, little speaker, to face the one whose bloodline has ruled through strength while yours was believed extinct?" Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the outer door of the stable crash open. Through her new connection with the creatures around her, she could feel their response to the newcomer's presence, wariness mixed with respect, the recognition of a predator so powerful that even they acknowledged his dominance. But underneath that recognition was something else, something that made her blood sing with anticipation and terror in equal measure. The Alpha King had come, and everything was about to change. The Alpha King entered the beast stables like a force of nature given human form. Lyra felt his presence before she saw him, a wave of power that made every creature in the building go silent and still. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with an authority so absolute that even her newly awakened instincts screamed at her to submit, to bare her throat, to acknowledge a dominance that transcended the merely physical. She pressed herself against the bars of the ancient wolf's cage, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it would burst. Through the iron gate that separated the deepest part of the stable from the main area, she could see torchlight flickering, hear the measured footsteps of someone who had never learned to doubt his right to any space he chose to occupy. Behind the Alpha King came his personal guard, warriors whose reputations were whispered in hushed tones throughout the territories. But it wasn't their presence that made her blood freeze in her veins. It was the creature that padded beside the Alpha King like a living shadow, its massive form radiating menace that made even the war-wolf cower. Fenris, the Alpha King's personal war beast, a creature of legend that was said to be less wolf than incarnate nightmare. Black as midnight, with eyes like burning coals, it stood nearly as tall as a man at the shoulder and had never been defeated in combat. Warriors spoke of it in the same tones they reserved for natural disasters, a force too terrible to fight, too powerful to escape. Where is she? The Alpha King's voice carried easily through the stable, deep and commanding, and edged with something that might have been curiosity. Where is this Omega who has managed to turn my kingdom's most dangerous predators into lapdogs? Lyra heard Betamarcus stammering a response, his usual authority reduced to nervous babbling in the presence of true power. She couldn't make out the words, but she could feel his terror through the emotional bonds she now shared with every creature in the building. The beasts were responding to their handler's fear, growing restless and agitated, all except Fenris. The Alpha King's war beast had gone completely still, its massive head raised and nostrils flaring. It was scenting the air, searching for something, and with a growing sense of inevitability, Lyra realized what it was looking for. Her. Interesting, the Alpha King murmured, and she could hear him moving closer to the iron gate that separated her section from the main stable. Fenris, what do you sense? The war beast didn't answer. Couldn't answer as far as she knew, but its behaviour spoke volumes. It approached the gate with careful steps, no longer the casual predator that had entered, but something far more focused, more intent. Lyra tried to make herself smaller, to disappear into the shadows as she had learned to do throughout her life, but it was useless. Every instinct she possessed was screaming warnings about the power approaching her, yet underneath the terror was something else, something that made her wolf, suppressed and weak as it was, lift its head with interest rather than fear. The gate creaked as it swung open, and suddenly there was nowhere left to hide. The Alpha King stepped through into her section, and Lyra got her first clear look at the male who ruled their world with absolute authority. He was exactly what she had expected, and nothing like she had imagined at the same time. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything, he moved with the fluid grace of a born predator. But there was something else about him, something that made her newly awakened senses hum with recognition. He wasn't just powerful. He was like her, in some way she couldn't define but felt in her bones. Fenris padded beside him, the war beast's burning gaze fixed on Lyra with an intensity that should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself studying the creature with the same fascination it was showing her. Up close, she could see that its eyes weren't just red, but held flecks of gold, like embers in a dying fire. "You," the Alpha King said, his voice cutting through her observations like a blade. "Stand up." It wasn't a request. Lyra struggled to her feet, her legs trembling with exhaustion and fear, but she managed to remain upright. The Alpha King approached slowly, each step measured and deliberate, until he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Look at me," he commanded. She had spent her entire life avoiding eye contact with those who held power over her. It was the first rule of survival for an Omega. Never challenge, never provoke, never give them a reason to notice you. But something in his voice compelled obedience, and she found herself lifting her head despite every instinct screaming at her to keep it down. The moment their eyes met, the world exploded. Light, golden and brilliant and impossible, erupted between them. Not visible light, but something that blazed through her consciousness like wildfire, connecting them on a level deeper than sight or sound or touch. She felt his shock mirror her own, felt his wolf respond to hers with a recognition so profound it shattered every wall she had built around her heart. Mate. The word echoed through her mind, and she couldn't tell if it came from her wolf or his, or from some ancient presence that had been waiting her entire life for this moment. Around them, the very air seemed to sing with power, golden threads of connection weaving between them until she could barely tell where she ended and he began. Through the bond that was forming, whether she wanted it or not, she felt his emotions crash over her in waves. Shock, yes, but underneath that was something fiercer, recognition, possessiveness, the bone-deep certainty of a predator who had found what belonged to him. Fenris threw back its head and howled, a sound of triumph and acknowledgement that seemed to shake the very foundations of the stable. Around the building, every other creature took up the call, their voices rising in a chorus that spoke of destiny fulfilled and prophecies awakened. The Alpha King stepped closer, his hand rising as if to touch her face, and she could see the same golden light reflected in his dark eyes. "Impossible," he breathed, but his voice held wonder rather than denial. "You're nobody," she whispered, the word automatic after a lifetime of being told exactly what she was worth. "I'm nobody." His hand cupped her cheek, and the skin-to-skin contact sent another wave of recognition through both their wolves. "No," he said, his voice soft but absolute. "You are everything I never knew I was looking for." Behind them, she could hear the sounds of chaos, Beta Marcus shouting orders, pack members crying out in confusion and fear, the noise of a world that had just been turned upside down by forces beyond their understanding. But all of that felt distant, unimportant compared to the male standing before her with starlight in his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Lyra," she managed to whisper. "Lyra." He spoke her name like a prayer, like something sacred that should be handled with reverence. "I am Kale, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and you—" He paused, his eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "You are my mate." The words should have been impossible. She was nobody, nothing, a broken Omega who couldn't even shift properly. But with his hands on her skin and his wolf singing to hers through bonds that felt older than time, she couldn't deny what was blazing between them. Fenris padded over and pressed its massive head against her free hand, a gesture of acceptance and submission that made her breath catch. The Alpha King's personal war beast, the creature that had never bowed to anyone, was acknowledging her as its queen. "This changes everything," Kyle said, his voice rough with emotion and something that sounded like destiny. "Everything." Through the golden haze of the mate bond, Lyra heard the truth in his words and felt her world shift on its axis. She was no longer the Omega who scrubbed floors and endured abuse. She was the mate of the Alpha King, recognized by beasts and bound by forces that neither of them could fight. And there would be no going back. The private chamber in the Alpha King's temporary quarters felt like a sacred space, removed from the chaos that had erupted throughout the compound. Lyra sat on the edge of an ornate chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to make sense of the golden threads of connection that still hummed between her and the male who paced before the fireplace like a caged predator. Kyle had dismissed everyone. His guards, the pack officials, even the crowd of gawkers who had followed them from the beast stables. Now it was just the two of them, and the mate bond that pulsed between them like a living thing, demanding acknowledgement neither of them was prepared to give. "This is impossible," he said for the third time, running his hands through his dark hair. "You're an Omega. You can't even shift. How can you be—" "Your mate," she finished quietly, the words tasting strange on her tongue. "I don't understand it either." He turned to face her, and she saw the conflict written across his features. The golden light in his eyes had faded to a warm amber glow, but she could still feel his wolf pressing against the connection between them, drawn to hers despite every logical reason why this couldn't be real. "Show me," he said suddenly. "Your wolf. I felt her during the recognition, but I need to see—" "I can't." The words came out sharper than she intended, laced with years of shame and failure. "I've never been able to shift, not properly. It's just broken." Kyle crossed the room in 3 quick strides, dropping to one knee in front of her chair so they were at eye level. "Nothing about you is broken," he said with fierce certainty. "I felt your wolf, Lyra. She's not weak or damaged. She's—" He paused, searching for words to describe something that defied easy explanation. Through the bond, she could feel him reaching for her wolf again, calling to the part of her that had always remained hidden. "She's suppressed," he said finally. "Something is keeping her locked away, but she's there. She's powerful, and she's yours, and she chose me as surely as mine chose you." Lyra closed her eyes, trying to feel what he claimed was there. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she caught a glimpse of silver fur and ancient wisdom. Her wolf stirred, lifting its head as if scenting freedom on the wind. "I don't know how," she whispered. Kyle reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hands in his. The moment their skin touched, power sparked between them. Not the overwhelming recognition of their first contact, but something steadier, more sustainable. A connection that felt like it had always existed, just waiting for them to find each other. "Tell me about your childhood," he said, "your family, how you came to this pack." "I don't remember my parents," she said, the words coming easier now with his hands anchoring her. "They died when I was very young. A hunting accident, or so I was told. The pack took me in, gave me a home." Through the bond, she felt his wolf snarl with sudden fury. His hands tightened on hers, not painful, but protective, possessive in a way that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, alarmed by the intensity of his reaction. "A hunting accident," he repeated, his voice flat and dangerous. "Convenient. And I suppose you've been weak and unable to shift for as long as you can remember." She nodded, confused by the direction of his questions. "Have you ever been sick? Often enough that someone needed to give you medicine, herbs, tonics to help you feel better?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Yes, she had been sick, frequently, mysterious ailments that left her weak and dizzy, that the pack healers treated with bitter teas and foul-smelling poultices. She had assumed it was because she was defective, her body rejecting the wolf that should have lived within her. "Every few months," she said slowly. "Sometimes more often. They said it was because my wolf was trying to surface but couldn't, making me ill." Kyle's eyes blazed with golden fire. "They lied to you. Those weren't healing tonics. They were suppression drafts. Someone has been systematically poisoning you for years, keeping your wolf locked away." The words hit her like ice water. "That's impossible. Why would—" "Because of what you are." He rose to his feet, pulling her up with him, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. "I felt your power during the recognition, Lyra. Your wolf isn't just strong, she's ancient, royal, the kind of bloodline that hasn't been seen in centuries." "I'm nobody," she protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm just—" "You're the beast speaker," he said, his voice filled with wonder and growing fury. "The bloodline everyone thought was extinct. Someone knew what you were and decided to bury it rather than let you claim your birthright." Through the mate bond, she could feel the truth of his words resonating in her bones. The dreams of ancient forests, the way the creatures in the stable had responded to her, the power she had felt stirring when she touched the ancient wolf. It all made a terrible kind of sense. "My parents," she whispered. "They weren't killed in a hunting accident." "No," Kyle said grimly. "They were murdered, probably by the same people who have been keeping you suppressed all these years." His thumb traced her cheekbone, the gesture tender despite the rage burning in his eyes. "But their plan failed, didn't it? The mate bond can't be suppressed. It called me here, made me see what you truly are." Lyra felt something crack inside her chest, like a dam breaking under pressure. Power flooded through her, not the overwhelming surge from the stable, but something steadier and more controlled. Her wolf lifted its head fully for the first time in her life, silver eyes opening to gaze at the world through her vision. Kale inhaled sharply. There she is, beautiful, fierce, exactly as she should be. "I can feel her," Lyra breathed, tears streaming down her face. "She's been trapped for so long, trying to reach me, but the barriers—" "Are breaking," Kyle finished. "The mate bond is burning through whatever they used to suppress you. Soon you'll be able to shift to access your full power." "But who would do this? Who would kill my parents and steal my life?" Kale's expression darkened. "That's what we're going to find out. But first we need to get you somewhere safe. The moment word spreads about our bond, whoever has been suppressing you will realize their secret is out. They'll come for you." As if summoned by his words, a commotion outside made them both turn toward the window. Voices raised in anger, the sound of running feet, someone shouting orders with the kind of panic that spoke of crisis. Through the mate bond, Lyra felt Kale's protective instincts flare to life. He moved to stand between her and the door, every line of his body radiating threat to anyone who might dare harm what was his. "It's starting," he said grimly. "The old order fighting to maintain control, but they don't understand what they're up against now." He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with golden fire and absolute determination. "You are my mate, Lyra. The Beast Speaker bloodline lives in you, and I will not let them bury it again. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Outside, the sounds of conflict grew louder. The political earthquake they had triggered was just beginning, and Lyra could feel the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a mantle she had never asked for but could no longer deny. The girl who had been nobody was gone forever. In her place stood the mate of the Alpha King, and the world would never be the same. The investigation began at dawn, with Kale's most trusted warriors cordoning off the healer's quarters, while the Alpha King himself interrogated the pack's record keepers. Lyra sat in the corner of Elder Marion's study, wrapped in a cloak that still carried Kale's scent, watching as her entire life was dissected and examined like a specimen under glass. "The infant was brought to us 18 years ago," Marion said, her weathered hands trembling as she opened the ancient ledger. "Found by our border patrol, clutched in the arms of a dying female. No identification, no pack markings. The woman lived just long enough to beg us to take the child and keep her safe." Kyle's jaw tightened as he leaned over the records. "And you never questioned where she came from? Never investigated the circumstances?" "The female had been tortured," Elder Marion said quietly, "systematically. Whoever killed her parents had taken their time about it. We assumed it was rogues, or perhaps a territorial dispute gone wrong. The child was so small, so fragile. We thought only of survival." Through the mate bond, Lyra felt Kale's rage building like a storm. His wolf was pacing beneath his skin, demanding action, demanding vengeance for what had been done to his mate's family. But his voice remained steady, controlled, as he questioned the elder. "Who made the decision to place her with the Omega families? Who assigned her status within the pack?" Marion's eyes flickered with something that might have been guilt. That was Beta Marcus's domain. He said she showed no signs of alpha blood, that it would be cruel to raise her with expectations she could never meet. "And the sickness?" Kale's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. the frequent illnesses that required constant treatment. Marcus said it was common in orphaned pups, that her wolf was trying to surface but couldn't because of the trauma of losing her parents so young. The healers prepared special tonics to help ease her suffering. Lyra watched as the pieces fell into place, each revelation hitting like a physical blow. Marcus, Beta Marcus, who had supervised her care, who had assigned her tasks, who had decided her fate at every turn. Marcus, who had been in a position to orchestrate her systematic suppression for 18 years. "Where is he now?" Cale asked, his voice deadly calm. "Gone," came a voice from the doorway. Captain Thorne, Cale's second in command, stepped into the study with his face grim. "Disappeared sometime during the night, along with several of his most loyal followers. His quarters have been cleared out, and his personal effects are missing." Cale's hands clenched into fists. He knew. The moment the mate bond completed, he knew his time was up and ran like the coward he is. "There's more," Thorne continued. "We found evidence in his private chambers, correspondence with parties outside our territory, references to maintaining the suppression and ensuring the bloodline remains buried." "Who was he working with?" Kyle demanded. "The letters are coded, but our best guess is the Shadow Council, the faction that's been pushing for traditional hierarchies, opposing any changes to the old ways." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. The Shadow Council was more legend than reality to most pack members, a whispered threat of traditionalists who would do anything to preserve the ancient power structures. If they were real, if they had been pulling Marcus's strings. "They killed my parents to prevent the Beast Speaker bloodline from returning," she said, the words coming out as barely a whisper. "And when that failed, when I survived, they decided to bury me alive instead." Kyle was beside her in an instant, his hands cupping her face with desperate gentleness. "But they failed, didn't they? The mate bond found you anyway. Your power is awakening despite everything they did to stop it." As if summoned by his words, her wolf stirred inside her chest. Stronger now, more present than it had ever been. The barriers Marcus had maintained with his poison were crumbling, and she could feel abilities she had never known she possessed beginning to surface. "The creatures," she said suddenly, "in the stables. I can feel them from here. They're agitated, sensing the danger." Kyle's eyes widened. "You can feel them from this distance?" She nodded, closing her eyes and extending her awareness. Not just the beasts in the stables, but every predator within the compound. The guard wolves pacing the perimeter, the hunting cats that prowled the forest edges, even the birds of prey circling overhead. All of them were connected to her by threads of power she was only beginning to understand. "They're all responding to you," Kyle breathed, wonder and fierce pride mixing in his voice. "Even without your full shift, your beast speaker abilities are manifesting." A commotion outside made them all turn toward the window. Shouts of alarm, the sound of running feet, someone screaming about an attack. Through her connection with the compound's creatures, Lyra felt it the moment danger crossed their borders. A hunting party moving with deadly intent, armed with weapons designed to kill and poison designed to suppress. "They're here," she said, her voice steady despite the terror flooding through her. "Marcus brought them back with him. They're coming for me." Kyle's wolf blazed to the surface, his eyes shifting to molten gold. "Let them come," he snarled, power radiating from him in waves. "I've been waiting 18 years to show the Shadow Council what happens to those who harm my mate." But even as he spoke, Lyra could feel the approaching threat through her heightened senses. These weren't ordinary rogues or desperate traditionalists. They moved with the precision of trained assassins, armed with knowledge of her weaknesses and weapons specifically designed to counteract her emerging abilities. "The suppression poison," she said suddenly. "If they have more of it—" "They won't get close enough to use it," Kyle growled. Through their bond, she felt his protective fury, the absolute determination of a mate who would burn the world down rather than let harm come to what was his. Outside, battle cries split the morning air. The Shadow Council had made their move, betting everything on one final attempt to bury the Beast Speaker bloodline forever. But they had underestimated two crucial factors: the power of the mate bond and the fury of an alpha king whose destined mate had been tortured for most of her life. As the sounds of combat grew closer, Lyra felt her wolf rise fully within her consciousness for the first time. Not the weak, suppressed creature she had always believed herself to be, but something magnificent and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. The girl who had scrubbed floors and endured abuse was gone. In her place stood the Beast Speaker, mate to the Alpha King, and the Shadow Council was about to learn that some bloodlines refused to die quietly. The attack came at her from 3 directions at once. Lyra barely had time to register the crossbow bolts whistling through the air before Cale's body slammed into hers, driving her to the ground as poisoned arrows shattered against the stone wall where her head had been. The study exploded into chaos. Elder Marion screaming, Captain Thorne shouting orders, the crash of splintering wood as black-clad figures burst through the windows. "Stay down!" Cale snarled, his body shielding hers as more bolts flew overhead. Through their bond, she felt his wolf surge to the surface, power radiating from him in waves that made the air itself vibrate with danger. But the attackers had come prepared. One of them raised a device that looked like a horn carved from black bone, and the sound that emerged was like nothing Lyra had ever heard. A shriek that bypassed her ears and drove straight into her soul, targeting the part of her that was wolf. The suppression horn. She had heard whispers of such devices, weapons designed specifically to incapacitate shifters by disrupting their connection to their wolves. The sound tore through her consciousness like claws, and she felt her newly awakened wolf recoil in agony. "No," she gasped, pressing her hands to her ears as the horrible sound continued. Around her, she could feel every shifter in the compound writhing in pain, their wolves forced into submission by the ancient weapon, all except the creatures in the beast stables. Through her connection with them, she felt their rage, not pain, but fury at the attack on their chosen alpha. These weren't ordinary wolves bound by pack law and human weapons. They were wild things, ancient things, and the suppression horn held no power over them. The werewolf's roar shook the entire compound as it burst free from the stables, followed by the shadow beast and every other predator that had claimed her as their own. They poured across the courtyard like a tide of vengeance, and the attackers' confidence crumbled as creatures they had never imagined facing descended upon them with lethal intent. But Marcus had prepared for this too. Even as his assassins fell beneath claws and fangs, he stepped through the shattered doorway with something that made Lyra's blood freeze in her veins. A suppression collar, spelled silver that would lock around her throat and cut her off from her power permanently, turning her back into the broken Omega she had been raised to believe she was. "Hello, little beast speaker," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the carnage surrounding them. "Time to go back to sleep." Kyle lunged at him with inhuman speed, but Marcus had anticipated that too. A second horn appeared in his hands, this one tuned specifically to alpha frequencies, and the sound that emerged drove Kyle to his knees with a howl of agony. "The Shadow Council sends its regards," Marcus continued, approaching Lyra with the collar held ready. 18 years we kept you buried, 18 years of careful suppression to prevent exactly this moment, but we can fix our mistake." Lyra tried to scramble backward, but her body felt leaden, disconnected from her will. The first horn was still sounding, its horrible shriek keeping her wolf locked away when she needed it most. Around her, the battle raged as her beast allies fought Marcus's remaining assassins, but she was defenseless, trapped in human form while death approached on silent feet. "You killed my parents," she whispered, the words torn from her throat despite the paralysis trying to claim her. "We killed your parents because they refused to accept the natural order," Marcus replied, kneeling beside her with the collar poised above her throat. "Beast speakers were meant to be extinct. Your bloodline threatens everything we've built, everything we've preserved." The collar descended toward her neck, and Lyra felt despair crash over her like a wave. After everything, the awakening, the mate bond, the discovery of her true nature, she was going to lose it all to the same forces that had stolen her childhood. That was when her wolf spoke to her for the first time, not through suppressed instincts or distant stirrings, but in clear, furious words that blazed through her consciousness like silver fire. "You are not prey," it snarled with a voice like ancient thunder. "You are the last of the speaker line, daughter of queens, inheritor of power that predates their pathetic councils. Show them what we truly are." The barriers Marcus had spent 18 years building shattered like glass. Power erupted from Lyra in a wave that sent everyone in the room staggering backward. Not the raw, uncontrolled surge of her earlier awakenings, but something focused and deliberate and absolutely devastating. Silver light blazed from her skin, marking her as royal bloodline for anyone with eyes to see. The suppression horn cracked in the assassin's hands, its ancient magic overwhelmed by power that refused to be contained. Around the compound, every creature within miles lifted its head and answered her call. Not just her beast allies, but wild packs that had never submitted to human authority, hunting cats from the deep forest, even the great eagles that ruled the mountain peaks. Marcus stumbled backward, the collar falling forgotten from his nerveless fingers. "Impossible!" he breathed. "The suppression should have held. The bloodline was broken." "The bloodline," Lyra said, rising to her feet as silver fire danced along her skin, "was never broken, only sleeping." Her wolf surged toward the surface, and for the first time in her life she didn't fight the transformation. Her bones lengthened and reformed, her spine curved into a graceful arch, her face pushed forward into an elegant muzzle. But this wasn't the painful, desperate shifting she had witnessed in others. This was harmony, human and wolf working together, as they were always meant to do. When the light faded, she stood before them in her true form, a wolf the size of a small horse, her fur pure silver marked with ancient symbols that glowed with their own inner light. The beast speaker, risen at last. Marcus fell to his knees, his face white with terror. Around the room, the surviving assassins threw down their weapons and backed toward the walls. Even through their fanaticism, they could recognize when they faced something beyond their power to control. Kyle struggled to his feet, his own transformation rippling through him as his wolf responded to hers with fierce pride and possessive satisfaction. His midnight black form padded to her side, and together they faced the remnants of the conspiracy that had stolen her life. Through her connection with every predator in the territory, Lyra felt their acknowledgement. Not submission. Beast speakers had never ruled through dominance, but recognition. She was pack, she was alpha, she was the bridge between human civilization and the wild heart that beat beneath it all. Marcus reached for a hidden blade, desperation driving him to one final attempt, but he never got the chance to use it. The werewolf appeared behind him like a shadow made flesh, and its jaws closed around his throat before he could even scream. The Shadow Council's greatest weapon was dead. Their suppression had failed, and the Beast Speaker bloodline lived again, marked in silver light and claimed by the mate bond that had called an Alpha King across continents to find her. As Lyra shifted back to human form, Kyle's arms closed around her, his voice rough with emotion and victory. "Now they know," he said against her hair. "Now the whole world knows what you are." Through the shattered windows she could see pack members gathering in the courtyard, their faces filled with awe and fear and grudging respect. The girl they had dismissed as broken stood before them, transformed, her power undeniable, her birthright reclaimed at last. The Beast Speaker had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same. The pack tribunal convened at sunset, held in the great hall where Lyra had once scrubbed floors on her hands and knees. Now she sat beside Kyle on the dais reserved for visiting royalty, her hand clasped in his as the evidence of 18 years of conspiracy was laid bare for all to witness. The surviving assassins knelt in chains before them, their black clothing torn and bloodied from their encounter with her beast allies. Behind them, pack members who had aided Marcus's suppression, the healers who had prepared the poison, the enforcers who had carried out his orders, the officials who had looked the other way, waited to learn their fate. "The charges," Captain Thorne announced, his voice carrying clearly through the packed hall, "are conspiracy to commit murder, systematic poisoning of a pack member, suppression of royal bloodline, and treason against the natural order." Elder Marion stepped forward, her weathered hands shaking as she presented the evidence they had gathered. Letters detailing the Shadow Council's plans, vials of the suppression poison, even Marcus's personal journal documenting years of carefully calculated abuse. "The scope of their crimes," the elder said, her voice heavy with shame, "extends far beyond what any of us imagined. They murdered her parents not just to prevent the Beast Speaker bloodline from returning, but because they feared what she represented. A power that answered to no council, no hierarchy, no authority, but the natural bonds between all living creatures." Lyra felt Kael's grip tighten on her hand as the full extent of the conspiracy was revealed. Through their mate bond, she could feel his rage building like a storm, not just at what had been done to her, but at the pack members who had participated through ignorance or cowardice. "What say you?" Kael asked, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of a born predator. His voice carried the authority of absolute power, the kind of dominance that made even the bravest warriors lower their eyes. "You stand accused of crimes against your future queen, against the mate I am bound to by laws older than your pathetic council. How do you answer?" One of the healers, an elderly female named Vera, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know," she whispered. "Alpha King, I swear by the moon goddess, we thought we were helping her. Marcus said the tonics would ease her suffering, would help her weak wolf find peace." "Ignorance," Kael said, his voice like winter ice, "is not innocence. You participated in the systematic torture of my mate for 18 years. You kept her from her birthright, from her power, from the life she should have lived." But before he could pronounce judgment, Lyra rose from her chair. The hall fell silent as she stepped forward, her presence commanding attention in ways it never had when she was just the broken Omega who cleaned their floors. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Around the hall, pack members who had once looked through her as if she didn't exist now, watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. She looked out over the faces of people who had known her all her life, some who had been cruel, others who had simply been indifferent, a few who had shown her small kindnesses when no one was watching. They were waiting to see what kind of justice the Beast Speaker would demand. "You took my childhood," she said, her words falling into the silence like stones into still water. "You took my parents, my power, my sense of worth. For 18 years you made me believe I was nothing more than a broken wolf who deserved whatever scraps of compassion you chose to throw my way." The assembled pack shifted uncomfortably, some looking ashamed, others defiant. "But," she continued, and power thrummed in her voice, not threatening but absolute, "I am not interested in becoming the kind of leader who rules through vengeance. The Beast Speaker bloodline was founded on harmony, not domination." She gestured toward the chained assassins. "These ones, who came here with poison and blade, who would have seen me collared and broken again, they chose their path knowing the consequences. Let them face the justice they deserve." Kael's wolf approved of the decision, his satisfaction flowing through their bond. The assassins would not leave this hall alive, and everyone present understood that their deaths would serve as a warning to any other Shadow Council operatives who might think to challenge the awakened bloodline. "As for the rest of you," Lyra said, her gaze sweeping over the pack members who had enabled Marcus's conspiracy, "you will make restitution, not to me, I have no need of your guilt or your grovelling, but to others who suffer as I did. There will be changes in this pack. No more Omegas treated as disposable. No more children raised to believe their worth depends on their strength. You will learn to see value in all members of your community, or you will find yourselves without one. The pack members bowed their heads in acknowledgement, understanding that they had been granted mercy they didn't deserve. Around the hall, Lyra could feel the shift in atmosphere. Not just fear of her power, but grudging respect for the wisdom she was showing. "The formal mating ceremony," Kyle announced, his arms sliding around her waist in a gesture of possession and support, "will take place at the next full moon. Any who wish to challenge this union may speak now or hold their peace forever." Silence greeted his words. Even the most traditional pack members could hardly argue with a bond that had been acknowledged by ancient beasts and marked by the awakening of a bloodline thought extinct. "Then it is settled," Kale declared. "The Beast Speaker has returned, the Shadow Council's grip on power is broken, and a new order begins tonight." As the formal proceedings concluded and the condemned were led away, Lyra found herself surrounded by pack members seeking to make amends. Some offered genuine apologies, others merely wished to align themselves with her newfound power. She accepted both with equal grace, understanding that true change would take time. But it was the children who touched her heart the most. Young wolves who approached shyly, their eyes bright with curiosity rather than fear. One little girl, barely old enough to shift, reached out tentatively to touch her hand. "Are you really the Beast Speaker?" the child whispered. Lyra smiled, the expression transforming her face from beautiful to radiant. "Yes, little one, and that means you never have to be afraid of the wild things in the forest. They'll know you're under my protection." The child's face lit up with wonder, and Lyra felt something settle in her chest. Not just acceptance of what she was, but purpose. She would use her power not for revenge, but for protection, creating a world where children like this one would never know the kind of suffering she had endured. As the hall emptied and the formal ceremonies ended, Kale pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple with infinite tenderness. "My queen," he murmured against her skin, "my fierce, merciful, impossible mate." Through their bond, she felt his pride in her choices, his satisfaction with the justice they had delivered, and underneath it all, the deep contentment of a male who had finally found his perfect match. The trials were over. The Shadow Council was broken, and tomorrow they would begin building the new world that her awakening had made possible.